Hey guys, I'm Lucanio.
I'm Eric.
And this is
Politics Through Literature.
Let's go. So today we're going to be looking at two essays by the late and legendary John Pilger. He was an investigative journalist who critiqued Western foreign policy. He wrote about a lot of issues domestically in Australia. He's from Australia, and in Britain. He spent a good portion of his life in Britain. And then across the globe, from Iraq to Palestine to exploitation in developing countries. And he shot and filmed 60 documentaries, which we really recommend that you watch. He is a brilliant and important voice known for revealing the lies of Western media and exposing the corporate elite that control the media. And he is great because he speaks in a way that is accessible, as the truth should be. So we're going to be looking at two essays. Mine will be from this book, Distant Voices.
And mine will be again from John Pilger, The New Rulers of the World. And we will be focusing on the first essay called The Model Pupil. And we'll also touch a little bit on the introduction to the book as well, just to give you a more clear background to the model people.
Okay, so I'm going to start. The essay that I'm going to be focusing on is called How the World Was Won Over. So it comes from this book, Distant Voices, and it's a compilation of essays that Pilger wrote in the 90s. And it addresses a variety of issues, some quite personal, his childhood. And then when I had come across this essay, it was such an aha moment. I am now halfway and I'm getting a sense of his voice, and the pace is picking up. We're getting to issues that are now more widespread, historical issues that are more widespread. And this is looking at the first Persian Gulf War in 1919. And this was a very important, shifting war. It was the last major conflict of the 21st century. It was the first war that was broadcasted live. And it was also when we had the UN passing Resolution 678. So we have a coalition of 35 countries coming together to get Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. Saddam Hussein in 1990, August the 2nd, invaded Kuwait, and a lot of people died in the process, of course. And the US wanted to pass a resolution that would allow them to use maximum force to get Iraq to withdraw. And how this is portrayed through the history books in schools is that this was an effort, a heroic effort to remove a dictatorship. It was a heroic effort to save the people of Kuwait. And it was also portrayed as this moment of a mass coming together of multiple countries to instill peace and justice, as the UN is tasked with doing. And this essay exposes how it was not actually the case at all. This coalition was rather a coercion by the US. And I'm going to read here that, but this degree of control was possibly only through a campaign of bribery, blackmail, and threats. It is no secret that rewards were provided to certain Arab states for their participation in the coalition, which he puts in inverted commas. And I should also read here that how were these historic events set in train? Forgotten facts tell us much. On October the 29th, 1990, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker declared, after a long period of stagnation, the United States is becoming a more effective organization. And I find that very interesting because we had spoken about when we were doing Washington Bullets by Vijay Prashad. We were speaking about the new international economic order that the Soviet Union proposed in 1990, was it?
1973 and 1974.
Okay, so it was quite a while back, but this is a statement by James Baker saying that, okay, finally the UN is becoming more effective. Why are they becoming more effective? Because they managed to pass a resolution that was very strange and how can I say this? Just a contradiction to what the UN is supposed to do, which is enforce peace.
It's very, actually, the passage you just read and what you're just sharing, the insights you're sharing with us, the United Nations is becoming a more effective organization. That's what James Baker said, right? However, when you actually look at it, there's strong arming of the United Nations. The US says it's efficient because it's legitimizing its illegitimate invasion of Iraq. So the US has managed to force the United Nations, and we also aware from other different books that many countries were forced to vote in favor of this resolution that was sponsored by the United States. There's countries that were promised debt relief, were promised more aid, were promised more funds for their health care system, or their health care systems programs. And military assistance in some cases, joint training exercises, and so forth and so on. So the efficiency, as we say, literature, politics through the kind of literature, the kind of words used is part of the bigger propaganda push by the US. When they say you violate human rights, you know you are on their sides, even though there's no evidence of human rights being violated in that particular country. When the IMF and the World Bank say structural adjustment, you know that there's going to be a lot of your finances flying out of the country. Your currency will be devalued. So that kind of vocabulary speaks to the strong arming, subtle omission, and so forth. And I see the same being done through the United Nations.
Yeah, so this essay is great because he lists all the countries that were strong armed. He puts them in a list, he puts them in italics, and I think that's what attracted me. So he says, for example, I'll read from Syria. The main exchange in the deal was with President Hafez Assad, the main exchange in the deal with President Hafez Assad was Washington's go-ahead for him to wipe out all opposition to Syria's rule in Lebanon. To help him achieve this, $1 billion worth of arms aid was available through a variety of backdoors, mostly Gulf states. Then we have Soviet Union, and this was a big surprise to Saddam Hussein. With its wrecked economy, the Soviet Union was easy prey for a bribe, even though President Gorbachev strongly preferred sanctions. The Bush administration persuaded the Saudi foreign minister to go to Moscow and offer $1 billion bribe before the Russian winter set in. So they even got an ally of the Soviet Union, didn't speak to the Soviet Union directly, just said, okay, you go speak to him and try get the Soviet Union to help us pass this resolution. We have China. In exchange for China's vote on Resolution 678, the United States arranged China's return to diplomatic legitimacy. So yeah, we have all of these countries that are being stronghold because they're in such vulnerable positions, and that's why the Persian Gulf War is an interesting conflict to look at, because it's trickle effect of the foreign relations that we see in right now, contemporarily. So we have in the 1990s the breakdown of the Soviet Union, we have the breakdown of Yugoslavia, we have China seeking legitimacy, all of these countries in vulnerable positions, and we see how the US nefariously takes advantage of that, and that's how they operate. Israel. The pacification of Israel was vital if the United States was to preserve its Arab coalition. The regular $5 billion America gives to Israel clearly was not going to be enough, and Israeli Finance Minister Yitzhak Mordai told US Deputy Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleberger that Israel wanted at least another $13 billion. This partly explains why the Israelis appear not to give a damn about current American warnings as they expel still more Palestinians and build still more homes for Russian Jews in the occupied territories. So there are three important questions when you think of this, when you read this essay. The first one is, okay, what are the trickle effects of this conflict to present day? And we look at Yemen and Cuba, the only countries that held out, the only countries that said no. Yemen, one of the poorest countries in the world. And let's look at what they said in response to the US's coercion and bribery. So only Cuba and Yemen held out. Minutes after Yemen voted against the resolution, a senior American diplomat was instructed to tell the Yemeni ambassador that was the most expensive no vote you ever cast. Within 3 days, a US aid program of $70 million to one of the world's poorest countries was stopped. And then one asks themselves, why would America be so harsh to a country that refuses another country to involve themselves, to interfere with Iraq's affairs? Because that's exactly what America loves to do. They love to involve themselves in other countries' political affairs. And the second one is, how far is a country willing to go to protect its principles and its values? So we have Yemen, who went quite far and who have been very consistent in saying no to the United States, even if it means having their aid stopped, even if it means their people suffering. But then we have China, who, they're known for having a very clear policy, a very clear position, and yet China, they said, yes, I had read that in exchange for China's vote, they of Resolution 678, they had their legitimacy given to them. And then here's this: Beijing has skillfully the impact of bribes inside China was explained by the scholar Liu Binyan for quite some time. He said There's been much talk of formal charges and trials being brought against the dissidents, but the pressure from abroad prevented it. Since August, however, Beijing has skillfully manipulated the Iraqi crisis to its advantage and rescued itself from being the pariah of the world. So China did not want to be the pariah of the world. And, you know, I asked you this question yesterday, and you gave a great answer of what do you think? Do you think that Yemen made a good decision in saying no to defend, even if it cost them so much, versus China, who maybe you could say they were thinking long term at the end of the day? They knew that, okay, this is probably an unjust resolution, or this is an unjust resolution, but we need to do what we need to do. What do you think of these two contrasting decisions?
If we start with the Yemens, they seem to be very aware of the destructive nature of America's diplomacy in the Middle East. That America seems to have a phobia of Arabs. Their unity would be detrimental to America's ambitions of hegemonizing or hegemony. And their stance and their support for the besieged Arab states has been unwavering. Their support for the Palestinians, their support for the Lebanese, know that Israel has occupied southern Lebanon, and the Syrian conflict is largely manufactured by and supported, funded by American dollars, to make sure that the Arabs are forced to have diplomatic relations with Israel and recognize the right of Israel to exist without even interrogating where or how Israel was founded, and disregarding the indigenous people of that land. Whereas in China, the time when this was happening was just after or around the collapse, or just after the collapse of the USSR, and China being a communist republic, and Russia on the other hand was also a socialist USSR, Union of Socialist Soviet Republic, so Soviet Socialist Republics. So the United States was taking advantage of that vacuum in that region of the world to impose their foreign policies. And we know that when the US does that, it does it resolutely with one mind, and the reason being they looking for markets. One of the primary reasons why the US always talks about human rights, our own interests, US's interests, it's not so much about the state, it's about the multinationals in the US that seek to have contracts in those parts of the world where the US is busy fermenting conflict or has ambitions of attacking those countries. And they're always looking for markets. Everywhere where there's oil, US companies must be first in line. And so the voting is in the UN is influenced by the United States self-interest. If they weaken these countries, or they can at least manipulate their decision making, their foreign policy, how they vote in the General Assembly, in the Security Council, the US is always advantaged. And where there's conflict, they have an advantage. You know? So you can see with Syria, until the the Russian Federation intervened in Syria, Syria would still be in conflict to this day. Only until Vladimir Putin had his army intervene was then that conflict started to wane down. And now China started, gaining its confidence, started rebuilding its economy, refusing to allow external influences in its decision making. So our next essay is The Model Pupil, also by John Pilger, from the book The New Rulers of the World. As I promised earlier, that we'll take a small snap of the introduction into the book. And the model pupil, John Pilger, focuses on Indonesia. But if we go back, we see that decision and how the IMF, the World Bank, the US, by extension, through its Treasury Department, influence the decisions made by the Indonesian government and how they manipulate even the elections in those countries so that a much more pliable leader takes over, and then it makes it easy for the US to siphon off the minerals and make profit out of those countries. So the first one will be The New Rulers of the World sets out to explain something of this new order and the importance of breaking the silence that protects great power and its manipulations, notably the current war. There are 4 essays beginning with the model pupil. This is the story of how the global economy in Asia was spawned in the bloodbath that brought General Suharto to power in Indonesia in 1965 and 1966. It draws on recently released documents that describe a remarkable meeting in 1967 of the world's most powerful corporate figures, at which they carved up the Indonesian economy sector by sector. This was done in the most spectacular way. They divided up into 5 different sections: mining in one room, services in another, light industry in another, banking and finance in another. You had these big corporate people going around the table saying, around the table saying to Suharto's people, this is what we need, this, and this. And they basically designed the legal infrastructure for investment in Indonesia. The Indonesians had no say. They basically just took over in that conference and told them what they wanted. The forests were given to France, and copper and nickel was given to American transnational companies and so forth. And Suharto himself got a few other areas of the economy that were controlled by him and his family only, and then a few other given to the generals to keep him safe in the army and so forth. And so the globalization, as it was gaining momentum, sometimes without even using the word globalization, they called Indonesia a service state. So what that meant was that Indonesia would just be a government by name, but controlled by multinationals, and they would drive policy, they would manipulate elections. Suharto was a dictator, a true dictator who killed over 200,000 people during his reign. And not once was he criticized by his handlers, the Americans. And not once the mainstream media wrote about the atrocities that were happening there. People were made to work for up to 36 hours, something that became notorious, called the long shift. So in this essay, he mentions a number of global brands, Gap being one, Adidas, Puma, and so forth, that are manufactured in Indonesia. The workers that manufacture these high quality products are paid less than $1 a day, and they work long shifts. They're always at the mercy of the employer. They can be fired with absolutely no justice, proper labor processes being followed at all. And when these contracts are signed, they are promised to be taken care of, including their accommodation. The head offices of these companies sitting in the US and in the UK mostly believe that the people's accommodation is taken care of. They live in much more humane conditions, water is provided and so on. But when they come to do inspection in these factories, they don't even talk to the workers. They walk through and inspect the products, the garments, be it garments or shoes, whatever products that are being manufactured. And they hardly ever talk to any of the workers. They don't care. And so there's been a number of activists that started fighting for the working conditions to be improved. And when they started that activism, they would be targeted. And there's one activist who was arrested, and it is actually was like that, 2 types of sentences. It's life or death. And in the case of this activist, Sukarto, he got life, and he went on to serve 15 years in prison for being an activist, fighting for the working conditions of the workers to be improved. And John Pilger goes on to describe how he went around. First, he imitated, or rather he walked into one of these factories and presented himself as a potential client who would want products to be made for his company. And that's how he got to see the working conditions of the workers. And that's what triggered him to embark on this journey of investigating what type of contracts the workers have and what type of contracts these companies have with their representatives in Indonesia. So he started interviewing the workers secretly off campus, away from the company's premises, and even visited where they lived. And some of them lived in very cramped spaces that were less than 3 by 3 square meters. Sleep, cook in that space, smaller than some of the prison cells probably in the world. And no provision of clean water, storage, raw storage, everywhere, and children playing amongst that. And a lot of people got sick, others died, and the employer didn't care. And the elites in Indonesia were making money, and the people, no one cared about them. So
these people that come and inspect the factories, are they Indonesians or are they people from other countries?
they are Indonesians, and he describes as you fly into Jakarta, the capital city. John Pilger describes how it looks from the air, that you can see the capital city surrounded by these manufacturing zones or factories, and just beyond that, less than 10 miles from that industrial area, it's where all the slums are found. And they are so horrible that he could not believe that the people, the end user of these products in those big cities, New York and London and the US generally and in Europe, they were not even aware under which conditions these products are manufactured. And it shocked him to the bone.
The thing is, I mean, now people are aware, but when something is out of sight, out of mind, it's easy to ignore. And that's the sad thing about people, countries in the developing world. We are the underground workers. We are the generators of Western economy. And we basically, we feed the corporate elite, because there are many countries that say, stop bringing in foreign products. We want to produce our own clothes, our own foods. We don't want stuff coming in from China. But of course they don't want that.
No. So that would be globalization.
I don't think it's globalization. I think that, well, it's a factor of globalization, but I don't think that we should demonize the word globalization. I really think that it's greed and capitalism and the pursuit of the corporate elite, because globalization has expanded rapidly thanks to technology and thanks to transport, but it has existed for centuries. Trading has existed for centuries.
Free market economy?
You can say free market economy, but I really think that the problem at hand are the corporate elites, and I was speaking about the choose the people that you put in power. That's what the West like to do. And of course you're going to choose the people that are more susceptible to the trappings of money. And it's the sad thing about countries that were previously incredibly impoverished. And I mean, once you have a lot of money in your hands, you know, you're going to want to hoard it. I read a really good article on the Daily Maverick. I need to get the name out. I'll put it up. But it's talking about the abundance mentality and the lack of abundance mentality. What is the opposite? Abundance mentality and scarcity mentality. Someone with a scarcity mentality is going to want to hoard and keep the money. They're going to take a lot of money and they're going to believe that in order for this money to be kept, we need to just keep it in the hands of a few. And unfortunately, that's what we see in so many African countries. We have these leaders that led the struggle, and finally they've lived a life without any money. They have a whole bunch of opportunities, power, money, after years of not having any of that. They want to keep it. They want to keep it forever. And then having the abundance mentality is saying that, okay, we have this resource. How do we share it? How do we work as a team to redistribute and have everyone be a part of this wealth? And that's what the West take advantage so much of, knowing that if we choose the right people who want to just cling to this model and power and money. That's what keeps these factories running.
Yeah. I mean, to add to that psychological makeup, Suharto, when he was eventually pushed out of power, the golden handshake he got was $13 billion, which amounted to about 10% of the total debt Indonesia had to pay to the IMF and the World Bank. 10% to a single individual.
What does one man need to do with 13 billion?
How much do you need to live relatively comfortable throughout your life?
I mean, and how old is he?
He was old. I mean, he came into power in 1967, and I think he was in power until the 90s.
It's the most sickening thing. And I mean, we have leaders like Thomas Sankara who, he rode a bicycle. He was a man for the people. That's abundance mentality.
Exactly.
And then we have leaders who, I mean, you get the ones that wear the Gucci and the white suits, and then you get the others that just wear plain. Okay, well, let me not say that because we have Zelensky wearing military wear only, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's also the values the leaders attach to their mandate. The true leaders are about a social contract with their people, and fake leaders, if I may call them, or those who are not revolutionaries, tend to think that being a leader, you are a celebrity. They behave like they, I don't know, rap and hip-hop artists, and you're not supposed to be that. You are a leader. There's a particular way, that decorum that you need to display. And if you want to be a hip-hop artist, then don't raise your hand and say, vote for me or elect me. No, you're in the wrong business. There's certain values that people expect from a leader, a particular decorum that people expect from a leader. And there's a lot of leaders that don't display. They're very disappointing, to say the least. And Suharto is that kind of leader. I mean, we remember I think it's the late Imelda Marcos, the wife of the Marcos, who was president, I think somewhere in Asia, who had thousands of pairs of shoes. When at some point, the security apparatus in the country, towards the end of his term, when they were raided for evidence of corruption in their houses and so on. They found I think it was over 10,000 pairs of shoes by Imelda Marcos.
It's
ridiculous. In a sea of poverty, you are displaying such lack of empathy.
Exactly.
By just the materials that you hoard into your life. There are people who have no shoes. There are children who go to school in winter without a simple pair of socks, and yet the level of opulence is disgusting, as you rightly say. So Indonesia became a model for imposing the wishes of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and throughout time and through this type of kind of literature, we have learned to understand what the word, or two words, structural adjustment, really mean, and the impact structural adjustment has on almost all the countries in the global south that have been forced, strong-armed into implementing structural adjustments. They all end in tears. Greece is a fairly recent example, I think about 9 years or so ago. And everywhere. Mozambique has now been forced into considering doing structural adjustment.
I think Nigeria just signed an insane deal just a few weeks ago.
Yes, and all of those, Kenya, there were uprisings. There was, and young people came out in force saying we can't afford the price of food. We don't know which one to pay for, electricity, water, or food. Fuel is just expensive. People with cars couldn't drive their cars to anywhere. And the world is starting to understand that the IMF and the World Bank were not formed to assist the global South. They were formed to siphon the wealth of the global South and take it to the global North, the Western powers, basically. So same is with the United Nations. When they were formed, the entire African continent was still colonized. The IMF, when it was formed, the entire African continent was still a colony of one or other European powers. So the Africans did not have a voice in the formation of those institutions, and South America as well, and the Asian tigers as well. None of this, the global South, had a voice in the formation of these bodies. And I truly believe that there won't be any change that supports the growth, economic, social, and otherwise, of the global South countries until they have a voice in the decision making within these organizations. And the model Pupil is a brilliant example. The work, as John Pilger articulates beautifully in this, the model Pupil, the IMF comes in, currency is devalued, money flies out of the country, commodities, everything. People can't afford to live, and yet they are the factory. They are manufacturing tons and tons of products that are leaving their country, but they are not. Their living conditions are not improving at all. And the model Pupil is a clear example of those kinds of maneuverings, machinizations by these global bodies. And as you also articulated earlier, that technology is helping change that, because now people can share information and their lived experiences through technology, which was not the case in the last 40, 50 years. The movement of information was very, very slow. So the new rulers of the world is really highly recommended. It has 4 essays in it. The model Pupil is focusing on Indonesia, and the other 3, one was called Paying the Price, focuses on Iraq, and The Great Game focuses on Vietnam, and The Chosen Ones focuses on Australia. And they are a great read indeed. And I would say, don't walk past this book, and don't walk past The Distant Voices as well.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for sharing. It was great. And we hope that you give John Pilger a read, watch some of his documentaries. Yeah, so thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.